bold and exciting independent trade policy that will realise our vision of a global Britain. The foundations have been laid and the preparations made. Shortly we will publish, as I said just now, our negotiating objectives for the US, with our other priority partners Japan, Australia and New Zealand following soon afterwards. And we will be guided throughout these negotiations not only by the UK's economic interests, but also by the values of the British people, to deliver a new generation of world-leading new trade deals that deliver for every nation and region of our United Kingdom. I beg to move.
Move formally. It's the adjournment of the committee, Lord Younger. We have to adjourn till 4:30. We have to adjourn till the House do adjourn during the committee do adjourn during pleasure.
I beg to move that the committee do now adjourn
during pleasure
until 4:30.
The question is that the committee do adjourn during pleasure until 4:30. As many as of that opinion will say content, and to the contrary not content, the contents have it.
The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The proceeding is currently suspended.
My Lords, question for short debate. Post Office Submasters Horizon Accounting System. Lord Berkeley.
Well, my Lords, I'm very pleased to have secured this debate today. It comes only a couple of weeks after we had a very useful start question in the name of Lord Arbuthnot, who started this campaign. We didn't start it, he's been doing it for years. And good luck to him. And also I'd like to pay tribute to the journalist Nick Wallace and to Private Eye, who've been keeping this issue going. It's a 10-year campaign for justice by hundreds of sub-postmasters who've been really badly treated by the Post Office. I want to concentrate my remarks on how those have suffered will be compensated and what action, if any, will be taken against what I see as the perpetrators. Noble Lords will know that there are many, many personal tragedies which have grown over the years. I shall quote from just one, Mr. Gary Brown from Rawcliffe in Yorkshire, who produced a very long and sad description of what's happened. But after several years of this Horizon system charging him for what he didn't owe, he ended up with a till £32,000 short, which for a small trader is really appalling. The computer said he was short, and what do you do? He called the auditors, and the post office interviewed him, searched his house. And, you know, in the end he had to sell his house and was desolate. All because Royal Mail refused to believe that the Horizon system was faulty. And luckily, he and others suddenly discovered he wasn't alone. And he was among hundreds of sub-postmasters from the 11,000 odd branches who were suffering from these accounting discrepancies. And many were complaining that they were not to blame, it was Horizon system that was at fault. Many were accused of stealing money, and that for a small business is a really serious accusation. Some had to pay post office tens of thousands of pounds, many lost their businesses, but they did form this group of 500 odd sub-postmasters to take forward a campaign, and it culminated in a judgment last December, which I think we've talked about before, but we need to talk about again. It's a judgment against the post office. It's a judgment with some pretty horrible comments about Fujitsu. And Mr. Justice Fraser, in quoting from Private Eye, he says some of his harshest words for Fujitsu, who run Horizon. He found on too many occasions Fujitsu personnel knowingly entered incorrect codes when closing inquiries, blaming user error when they had already concluded this wasn't the case. That's a criminal thing to do against these small businesses. And I think it's worth, my Lords, my quoting from some of the judgment of Mr. Justice Fraser, because he said, and I quote, "The approach by the Post Office to the evidence of someone such as Mr. Latif demonstrates a simple institutional obstinacy or refusal to consider any possible alternative to their view of Horizon, which was maintained regardless of the weight of factual evidence to the contrary." And this went on all the way through over a year, when the Post Office tried to first of all get Mr. Justice Fraser removed because he didn't agree with them. It's a wonderful way of getting rid of a judge if you don't like him. And he concluded that, and I quote again, "This approach by the Post Office has amounted in reality to bare assertions and denials that ignore what's actually occurred. It amounts to the 21st century equivalent of maintaining that the earth is flat." But that's a pretty strong judgment. And after many, many attempts, the Post Office finally had to give up and accept that this was the answer. So, my Lords, who was to blame and what next? The Post Office is managed by BIS, the department, and one has to ask the question, who was on watch over these 10 years? It was started off with Lord Mandelson, then it was Vince Cable, then Sajid Javid, and of course many junior ministers. I'm not going to read out a long list of junior ministers, but I have to ask the question, what did they do about their company? It's their company on our behalf that was abusing its position and defrauding perhaps 10,000 postmasters of their health, their livelihood, and I haven't found any serious apologies for this yesterday. Lord Duncan, when we discussed it in the starred question on the 4th of February, he apologised, and Baroness Neville Rolfe also mentioned that she'd been a minister, and they were all genuine, but who was running the post office then? Adam Crozier, 2003 to 2010. Moya Green took over then and split the post office and Royal Mail, and then Paula Venables, 2012 to 2019. And she was quoted in some of the government's public relations papers as the chief executive who took the post office from 120 million loss to breaking even. And according to the Daily Mail, she was paid 3.7 million in 6 years. But more important, while presiding over a company that tried every means at its disposal to deny, obfuscate and challenge in court any attempt by the sub-postmasters to get an independent inquiry into the failures of the IT system and the compensation, is pretty rich. And of course, as ever, because she then left and she's been promoted to run something in the health service. The judge found against the post office on all counts and awarded the postmasters 58 million, but it's quite clear that most of that is going to go into legal costs. How you can achieve 58 million of legal costs, but then of course you're the post office and you keep on challenging it. Fujitsu also behaved in what might be seen, whether it's criminal or dishonest, I don't know, but it's a question that needs to be answered, and maybe, in fact, some kind of independent public inquiry is the only answer. So now, my lords, I turn to what's the government going to do to provide some proper compensation to the victims of this failure, maybe fraud and greed, of the company that we, as taxpayers, are supposed to own on behalf of the taxpayers. It's very easy to spin out the legal processes for years and to avoid blaming anyone in the post office or officials or ministers, etc. But should there be a public inquiry? Should there be action against Fujitsu over Horizon? I don't know. But the postmasters who reasonably believe that the government and its company, our company, would behave in an open, honest and transparent way, I think have been very badly let down. They deserve urgent and generous compensation. I welcome Lord Duncan's helpful remarks the other day as far as they went, and I hope that our new minister will be equally helpful and supportive of an urgent resolution. But I think there's also a need for government and parliament to review how senior people who've so clearly failed and brought their companies into disrepute get moved and promoted, whilst those they destroyed are left to suffer with nowhere to go. This one last thought, my lords. The Royal Mail 10 years ago included the post office, and the post office now issues stamps with the Queen's head on it. So one might expect that the Queen and other members of the royal family would feel some attachment to the post office. As noble lords know, I've had some questions about royal finances and the duchy finances, but I've never had cause to question their business ethics or employment practices, and I wouldn't. But we can be sure that they would never stoop to such appalling treatment of their lowest paid staff as forcing them into penury or worse, as their government has done so. This should have been the approach of ministers and directors of the post office. I think they failed miserably, and we must make amends, the government must make amends and compensate all those affected.
My Lords, I thank Lord Berkeley for bringing this important debate today and to highlight the long campaign that's been going on. And obviously the response to the outer court settlement heard on the 11th of December last year. And it is following that announcement and those dark intervening years I wish to speak to when the first of the 2015 legal action was actioned. A settlement, yes, but at what cost? And what kind of settlement in terms for each one of those claimants who previously alleged and spoke out that the Horizon system caused shortfalls in their financial accounting. They were not believed, but contrary were given assurance of the reliability of the system. The inevitable happening and consequently resulted in leading to some postmasters and mistresses being made bankrupt, while others were prosecuted and even jailed for offences including false accounting, fraud and theft. And let's not forget those sub-postmasters and mistresses who also paid back the money which the Post Office claimed they had stolen. And if not, we're told that they would face possible criminal prosecution. Moving on to a personal level, you can hardly imagine during those intervening years the postmasters and mistresses continued to deal over the counter face-to-face with questions from their customers, colleagues and friends, and even harder when meeting them in the street, being asked the inevitable question. They felt their reputation and integrity was being called into question. They felt humiliated. Postmasters and mistresses work hard. They're not only valued, but they are the eyes and ears for many in their local community. The settlement allows them to, yes, carry on where they left off and perform their excellent services, interacting once more with their customers, as they've done for many years, on a trusted contractual basis. And importantly, offering advice and guidance to customers, a lifeline to many, particularly the elderly, who use their valued banking services and other postal facilities. Yes, they've had their reputations at last restored. They can walk tall with their heads held high, but lingering at what personal cost? The 57.8 million settlement, the reality is that only a fraction of that money, which has been won, about a third of that amount, will be awarded. My Lords, I will listen to the Minister's response with interest and hope the Noble Lord can inform us what further action is or can be taken. It may now be something of a non-story to some people, but not those people who were involved. It is real. But there are still questions to be answered, so with a new regime in place, the question is, can they bring about change? And finally, my Lords, yes, I am a supporter of the Post Office service, and together with other sub-postmasters and mistresses, would certainly like to see more expanding services offered with more transactions, so the Post Office can go forward with a strong future.
Well, I've come to this case rather late in the day, and I defer to those who have been involved for so much longer. I was aware that there were sub-postmasters in my local area who'd been involved, and gradually, therefore, I took an interest and researched myself and read the background briefing. And I have to say, the more and more I read, the more and more concerned and appalled I became. And that's why I wanted to make just a short contribution to this debate today, and I'm so grateful to Lord Berkeley for having enabled that to happen, because this is not something I think that we should allow to go away. Obviously, I share the views that have already been expressed. I feel an acute sense of injustice on behalf of the sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses, many of whom have seen their reputations and their lives destroyed by what has happened here. Some of them have been made bankrupt, some of them have been imprisoned, and many of them have suffered mental health problems as a result of the anxieties they've faced. Surely none of us can feel comfortable about that, and very few of us, I suspect, feel that the settlement that was finally reached is sufficient compensation for all that they have suffered, particularly when so much of that money is actually going to go to lawyers. But I think there are, and they've already been mentioned, I think there are at least four wider issues here that we need to look at. The first is the way in which the government and the civil service, the department, manage the relationship with the Post Office during this period of time. The judge in the case suggested that the Post Office appeared at times to conduct itself as though it was answerable only to itself. It isn't, it shouldn't be, and we should better understand why the situation was allowed to happen. I've run large government agencies and non-departmental public bodies in the past. I was always very aware that my parent departments were watching me pretty closely and sometimes would robustly challenge what we were doing. So was there robust challenge during this 20-year period? And if not, why not? And if there was, what was the consequence? That's the first of the four issues I think we need to look at. I think the second issue is about the culture which exists in the Post Office so far as sub-postmasters are concerned. In the appeal court, it was said that the Post Office felt it seemed entitled to treat sub-postmasters, and I quote, in capricious or arbitrary ways which would not be unfamiliar to a mid-Victorian factory owner. Now look, these are people who provide essential services in communities across the country. Essential because many citizens depend upon them for their existence. They're people who play an important part beyond that in their communities. Whether or not they are fairly treated and supported is a matter of public interest. It is not an entirely internal matter for the Post Office, and it shouldn't be. And we should be clearer about what the culture of the Post Office really is. I notice in the last week or two the new Chief Executive has actually said how important it is to deal with this. Well, it starts from a pretty low base from my observation. And I think, again, we need to have a close look at how it's got to where it is. The next issue, and Lord Berkeley has raised this, is, and it will be the subject, I suspect, of further litigation. But I have serious misgivings, like Lord Berkeley, about the way in which Fujitsu managed the introduction of the Horizon accounting system. I have serious reservations, again, about how the Post Office and the department managed the contract and held Fujitsu to account. And well, the judge himself has commented that he has serious reservations about the conduct of Fujitsu's staff during the course of the contract and even in the court hearing. This is not the first IT problem close to government that's caused a few problems. It really is about time we learnt the lessons and asked ourselves, why does this keep happening? It's something else we should look at more closely. And the fourth point, which hasn't yet been mentioned, but during the proceedings, the Post Office itself said that if the sub-postmasters were right, and they have now been proved to be right, this would represent, and I quote again from the Post Office's own material, an existential threat to the Post Office's ability to continue to carry on its business throughout the UK in the way that it does. Well, if that's the case, and if it's not just hyperbole, then we need again to know how they intend to address that existential threat and ensure that this essential service continues to be delivered effectively. As I say, these are wide-ranging concerns which go to the heart of how the Post Office behaves and is held accountable. And for that reason, unless the Noble Lord the Minister can provide sufficient reassurance today, I agree that there is a strong case for seeking a fully independent public inquiry covering the issues of culture, accountability, the role of government and the IT failures. Because after all, the only inquiry to date was that carried out, I think, on behalf of the Post Office by the accountancy firm Second Sight in 2013, and that was restricted, again, I think I'm right in saying, to the Horizon system itself. As I said the other day in the House when this question was asked by Lord Arbuthnot, It's sadly all too easy for large corporate organisations like the Post Office to say that it's made a mistake, but that it will ensure that this is never repeated. Frankly, I think that will bring little comfort to the sub-postmasters who've been so grievously mistreated, but nor should it be enough to reassure us that the culture will change, that the government will in future properly manage the relationship with the Post Office, and that this important public service can effectively deal with the issues that it faces. It's not enough for us just to have words and promises. And that's why, again, I think, and if I were a minister, heaven forbid, I think I'd want someone to have an objective, independent look at what happened and be sure that it's going to change.
I'm grateful to Noble Lords for allowing me to speak in the gap. And particularly grateful, if I may say so, to the Noble Lord, Lord Berkeley, for putting down this debate and for his speech, which I thought was a masterpiece of understatement. He rightly thanked Nick Wallace and Private Eye. I would like to add to those thanks Computer Weekly, which has been campaigning on this issue for years. And I can, as a warning, I have a question down on this topic again next week on Thursday. And if I could persuade Noble Lords who've spoken today to speak on that, that would be very good, because they would then have been able to consider my noble friend's reply this afternoon. My Lords, what the Post Office has done is this. It inflicted losses on the sub-postmasters through its defective accounting system. Then it blamed the sub-postmasters for those losses and often told them that they were the only ones suffering those problems. Then it made them repay to the Post Office money which the Post Office had already taken from them. Then it dragged those poor people through the humiliation of court hearings, criminal convictions, bankruptcies, and worse. At my request, my Lords, it set up a mediation scheme, which it then sabotaged. It forced the sub-postmasters to incur what was an awful risk and the costs of litigation, which the Post Office lost comprehensively, paying the sub-postmasters a derisory proportion of what they had actually lost. My Lords, I find it hard to find words strong enough to condemn the people in charge of this catastrophic fiasco. And what have those people suffered, those people in charge of this, as a result? One of them, Paula Van Els, has been given a CBE and now sits on government-sponsored boards. None of the rest, so far as I can see, have suffered at all. But it's not their suffering that we want. It's justice and proper compensation for those who have been dragged through this. And the litigation settlement simply doesn't cut it. So, the court in the Common Issues trial found that sub-postmasters should be compensated for their loss of their office, something which was not covered by the settlement agreement. What is the government going to do to facilitate that? The court held that the National Federation for Sub-Postmasters is not an organisation independent of the Post Office. Its very existence depends upon it not giving the Post Office grounds to challenge its activities. There's also evidence before the court that the NFSP has in the past put its own interests and the funding of its future above the above the interests of its members. Why is the government continuing to talk to the NFSP as though it were representative of the sub-postmasters when the judge has found that it is not? It's clear from the judgments, as the Noble Lord, Lord Bichard said, that Fujitsu altered the accounts of the sub-postmasters while telling people that they couldn't, and while knowing that the sub-postmasters were being dragged through the courts, prison, and the bankruptcies that we've heard about. Some of the witnesses of Fujitsu have been referred to the Director of Public Prosecutions. But what more is being done to bring Fujitsu to account? And finally, my lords, the accounting officer for the Post Office is the permanent secretary of the Bays Department. My noble friend, the Minister, is answerable for that permanent secretary. What responsibility does the government take for this truly dreadful story?
My Lords, on the 4th of February, as the Noble Lord Berkeley has already mentioned, and we thank him for bringing this debate today, we had a question from the Noble Lord Arbuthnot, on this very subject, where it transpired that the Post Office had the power to be judge and jury for its own prosecutions, and trusted, honest people suffered at their hands because they refused to believe that the Horizon computer system had glitches which caused discrepancies. And it dragged on for years until last December the directors of the Post Office finally had to admit they got it wrong. But not before people had reputations, finances and lives ruined. The thrust of the Noble Lord Berkeley's question today is whether the government intends to take action against the directors of the Post Office, who presided over almost 20 years of mismanagement, incompetence and downright illegal activity. We've heard many instances this afternoon of how the behaviour of the Post Office, termed by Lord Justice Coulson, who judged the Post Office's appeal, was like a Victorian factory owner, as Noble Lord Bishard has said. It's shocking, and even with the benefit of hindsight, it's still hard for me, amongst many others I'm sure, to understand how things have come to the present situation that we find ourselves in. 10 years ago, we were talking about reversing the decline in the numbers of post offices and giving them a wider remit, indeed, to be the face of government in the community, to combine sub-post offices with other community services, the local shop, the pub, the library, doing more, offering those wider range of services for longer than traditional post office opening hours, fitting in with normal local shop opening hours, not doing less, with much reduced revenue coming in over long hours, to the extent that a recent survey by the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters found that 3/4 of sub-postmasters and mistresses are earning below the minimum wage. Now, of course, digitalisation and changes in shopping trends have taken their toll, but sub-postmasters have been prevented from extending their own parcel service by an exclusive contract with the post office itself. They're hamstrung from competing in today's marketplace. So they're left with servicing the needs of those unconfident with buying or seeking services online, the old and the poor. Yet Paula Venables, the previous CEO, left the post office for the NHS last year with a CBE, in part for her services to the post office. The Noble Lord Arbuthnot, has been a strong campaigner on behalf of sub-postmasters, and I'm delighted that he was able to speak in the Gap today. He's raised the question of the Criminal Cases Review Commission, which is considering the impact of the out-of-court settlement on the 34 Horizon-related cases it has under review. But he's asked, what about the rest of the cases? What about the people like Mrs. Shaheen, who was not listened to, despite identifying at least 11 errors on the Horizon system, sent to prison after accepting a plea bargain to drop the theft charge against her? She and so many others deserve justice. They deserve for their names to be cleared, and they deserve reparation. Surely an out-of-court settlement of £57.75 million, from which legal expenses have to be paid, leaving only £12 million for sub-postmasters themselves, cannot be the end of the story. And that 12 million came from Lord Duncan of Springbank on the Springbank of the 4th of February. We know that Lord Justice Coulson has said he'll refer Fujitsu, the providers of the Horizon system, to the Director of Public Prosecutions for possible further action. But what about the people who must admit their own culpability? What is the point of having directors without responsibility? Will these people be referred to the DPP? They must, my lords, be brought to book. We have a new chief executive in the Post Office and, we're told, a new regime. So can the Minister please tell us, in his remarks on the 4th of February, Lord Duncan of Springbok mentioned a new national framework to ensure, he insists, that the past situation cannot be repeated. Can the Minister please give us some detail on this and when he estimates that this framework will be in place? On the 4th of February, Lord Duncan said, "I cannot comment on the people who were in positions of power during that time because I simply do not have the answer." Well, does this Minister have the answer now? He said during a significant period in the history of Post Office, wrongdoing took place. For the sake of the sub-postmasters who've been wronged, how and when will they get justice?
My Lords, I'd like to welcome the Noble Lord Callum to his new position. It makes a bit of a change from Brexit. Not the nicest of debates to open up with, especially following the previous questions that we've had during oral questions. I'd like to thank Lord Berkeley for securing today's important debate. The High Court judgment in the Bates v Post Office is viewed as the climax to over 20 years, 20-year ordeal riddled with injustice, as we've heard. An ordeal where technology failed the workers and bosses failed their employees. And as my noble friend Lord Berkeley did, I want to start by sharing some of the stories beyond those of Alan Bates, whose name is on this case. A number of them have already been covered, so I won't touch on those. But there are a few that are striking, and they go to the heart of this case and the heart of this issue around fairness, equality, and how it affected and how it's still affecting the individuals. There was Seema Misra, who ran a post office with her husband in Surrey, but time and again had to put their hands in their own pockets to pay for the shortfall. A shortfall that ended up totalling around 80,000 was ultimately found, and she was sentenced to 15 months in jail while pregnant with her second child. Ruba Shaheen, we've heard about. There was Joe Hamilton, who was accused of taking £36,000 from a village shop she ran in Hampshire. After pleading guilty to false accounting to avoid a more serious charge, she gave up her shop and found it difficult to get another job because of the criminal record she had. My noble friend Lord Berkeley touched on the case of Gary and Maureen Brown, so no need to repeat that. There was another case, and this is around those cases influenced by Horizon's problem. For example, Horizon's records were used as evidence against Robin Garbutt, who was accused of stealing money and murdering his wife. During today's debate, we must not lose sight of the human impact of these failures. Many are now seeking to overturn their convictions, and rightly so, and it would be interesting to hear some words from the Noble Lord the Minister about those previous convictions and the government's position on those. Turning to the High Court judgment from December last year, I think we all strongly welcome its outcome and the approval of the 58 million settlement between the Post Office and the 550 claimants. As we've heard, I think, from every contribution, it's just a shame that so little of that will be going to the individuals themselves. It confirmed what has long been known, that a number of bugs, errors and defects in the Horizons IT system had caused discrepancies in sub-postmasters' branch accounts. And again, I want to praise Alan Bates, the former sub-postmaster from North Wales, for all the work with the investigative journalists and with others in seeking justice. As many noble lords have been, I was struck by the vivid language Judge Fraser used in his judgment, stating, and in this I don't actually need to repeat some of the statements from before, there are that many, stating that the Post Office showed the most dreadful complacency and total lack of interest in investigating these serious issues, of which amounted to, and I quote, and this is one that is repeated but is worth repeating, the 21st century equivalent of maintaining the flat earth. And Lord Beechard and Baroness Burt touched on the ending comment by Lord Fraser, which in a capricious or arbitrary ways, which would not be unfamiliar to mid-Victorian factory owners. That is last year. So some questions for the Noble Lord the Minister. Why did the Post Office make multiple appeals to try and see off this court case rather than deal with the issues and settle? Why did it ask for Judge Peter Fraser to recuse himself from the trial? While the trial might be over, the shameful period is not. Many questions remain unanswered by the Post Office, by Fujitsu and by the government. The Post Office's new CEO is welcome, but the organisation can't hide behind a cosmetic change. A cultural shift is needed from top to bottom to rebuild trust between sub-postmasters, sub-postmistresses and the Post Office itself. Will the Post Office introduce an independent component when conducting any further future prosecutions? How many branches still use the Horizon IT system? And can the government, the Post Office, guarantee that all bugs in the system have now been fixed? Fujitsu, as we've heard, continually dismissed any claims of problems with its Horizon accounting system, which has been used in 11,500 branches by 2013. Does the government support any action against Fujitsu and its directors? We must also consider the government's role in the ordeal and its responsibility to help as well. The CWU, a trade union branch secretary for sub-postmasters, pointed out a government representative sits on the board of the Post Office, and that representative presumably took part in those board meetings that made decisions on litigation, including the attempts to recuse the judge. Would the Noble Lord the Minister care to comment on that? And speaking in the House a couple of weeks ago, the Minister, the Noble Lord Duncan, stated the Post Office had got it badly wrong and confirmed that only 12 million of the 58 million compensation will be going to the individuals. He himself said, the Minister then said, this was not enough, and with that I couldn't agree more. But why then has the government said it will not pay or help towards the legal costs of the sub-postmasters? Does the government still hold to this policy? And then the bigger point encompassing all of them, and I suppose this is the crux of it, Does the government support a full public inquiry into Horizon, Fujitsu and all of the subsequent issues that arose from it? I've got about a minute left, so I just want to touch on a few wider thoughts. There's no escaping how technology will displace workers, reconfigure the labour market, and change decisions made by companies and governments in the future. And in fact, this is happening now. The power of tech companies is also only going to grow as technology increases as technology increasingly dominates our personal and our private lives. The fear of similar bugs like the Horizon systems may well diminish, but human error could increase as we see machine learning becoming more and more common. And no matter how many jobs are replaced by automation, human oversight will always be needed. My Lords, big change is coming, and we must learn and we must be ready. But for the people affected by Horizon, they deserve to get the justice and compensation owed to them.
Well, can I first of all thank Lord McNichol for his welcome remarks. Dealing with some domestic issues makes a great change from talking endlessly about EU renegotiation and the various withdrawal bills. I'm delighted to be doing the job. Tricky though many of the issues are, but I would like to thank Lord Berkeley for which I've kind of reunited in terms of policy content after our time together dealing with transport issues. But he has raised an important debate today. I've only been in post for 10 days, and this was an issue I wasn't aware in detail about. I've, of course, seen the various press comments and summaries about it, so the debate today has given me an excellent opportunity to familiarise myself with the issue, and indeed, let me say at the outset that I share many of the horror and concern that has been raised by many noble lords today. But I do want to reassure the House that this government does fully recognises the vital role that postmasters and their post officers play at the very heart of our communities. It is therefore only right that the treatment of them is of the utmost importance to us, so that they can continue to deliver a service that is so highly valued by many up and down the country. And let me also say that the government also values the economic and social importance of post offices to people, communities and businesses across the UK. And that is why, since 2010, the successive governments have made a commitment to safeguard the post office network and ensure its sustainability for the future. Now, to start with, let's consider the current facts regarding the post office. Now, between 2010 and 2018, the government has provided nearly £2 billion to maintain and invest in a national network of at least 11,500 post offices. We set requirements so that 90% of the UK population are within 1 mile and 99% are within 3 miles of their nearest branch. Government investment has enabled the modernisation of over 7,000 branches, added more than 200,000 opening hours per week and established a post office as the largest network on Sunday. Post office banking services enable 99% of personal and 95% of business banking to be done in any of the 11,500 branches, supporting consumers, businesses and local economies in the face of accelerated bank closure. The financial performance of Post Office Limited has also improved, with the Post Office making a profit for the third year in a row, thereby reducing government funding from £415 million in 2013-14 to £50 million in 2021. And all of this has been achieved because of the able and hard-working men and women who proudly, diligently serve their respective communities each working day. I say that as a background to the appalling circumstances that we are addressing today. Now, if I can start off with discussing the Horizon accounting system litigation. Now, as I said, postmasters are a significant part of the sustainability and future of the Post Office. In relation to the Horizon accounting system case, Post Office Limited has accepted that in the past it got things badly wrong in its dealings with a number of postmasters, and it's right that they have apologised for that. On the 11th of December, as members are aware, the Post Office and the claimants reached a comprehensive resolution to the litigation following several days of respectful, challenging and ultimately successful mediation. The Post Office Chairman, Tim Parker, said that we are grateful to the claimants for taking part in this mediation and agreeing a settlement, bringing the group litigation to a close. I am grateful, this is what the Chairman said, I'm grateful to Nick Reid for his important engagement in the mediation process. We accept that, in the past, we got things wrong in our dealings with a number of postmasters, and we look forward to moving ahead now with our new CEO currently leading a major overhaul of our engagement and relationship with postmasters. Let me reassure, firstly, Lord Berkeley, that this government does not take for granted the financial and emotional suffering that the impacted postmasters have endured in relation to issues with the Horizon system, which is why this government is pleased that a resolution has finally now been arrived at to settle this long-running litigation. Now, a number of noble lords, and particularly Lord McNichol, talked about the Horizon system. And that question was, of course, central to the subject of the litigation. And the second Horizon Issues trial, where judgment was handed down on the 16th of December. The judgment has made clear that it is a historical analysis of the Horizon system at a specific point in time in the group litigation, and it is not a judgment on the system today. When handing down the Horizon judgment, the judge found that the Horizon system, as it is today, is relatively robust, I quote. So, to move on, we are committed to working alongside the new CEO of Post Office Limited, Nick Reid, to implement the necessary cultural and organisational changes highlighted by the litigation. Nick, I think, has shown that he is personally committed to learning the lessons and is currently leading a major overhaul of the Post Office's engagement and relationship with its postmasters. And the government has proactively challenged the Post Office CEO and Chairman personally to strengthen their relationship with postmasters and take on board the lessons learnt through the litigation. Now, the preparation for this debate offered me the opportunity to actually speak to Nick Reid this morning, and we had a productive conversation about all of the issues where he reassured me of the steps that the Post Office are taking on this. Now, both Lord Bishard and Lord Berkeley made a number of points about responsibility of BEIS and the government for many of these issues. Let me explain that BEIS relied on the Post Office's management to investigate the issues with the Horizon system, and government were assured that the system was robust and that the issues raised by the postmasters were being handled appropriately. BEIS pressed management on these issues and was given consistent advice from the company's experts that appeared to verify these claims at that time. There have been numerous attempts over the years to try and resolve these issues, including an independent investigation in 2013, a mediation scheme in 2015. All of these failed to resolve the issues, leaving the court as the only means of providing the independent view that it proved the case that all sides needed. In hindsight, of course, facts have come to light through the litigation that has revealed that advice received over that period was flawed. As such, the government will be monitoring closely the progress that the Post Office is delivering on its programme of commitments following the settlement, and that relationship will be constantly reviewed. So, as I said, I did speak to the CEO of the Post Office, Nick Reid, this morning, and I was glad to hear that improvements at all levels of the Post Office are well underway, reflecting many of the lessons learned from this difficult experience that enables him to take forward a modern Post Office. This means that the company fostering a genuine commercial partnership with postmasters, where the necessary support for them to operate branches successfully is available. Now, following the agreed settlement, the Post Office is also continuing to directly address past events for affected postmasters. A scheme will be announced in the near future with the aim of addressing historic shortfalls for postmasters who are not part of the group litigation settlement. Now, Lord Berkeley asked about compensation for those affected, and the settlement agreed with the Post Office included all legal and other costs. In those circumstances, the Government cannot accept any further request for payment. Whilst the process was undoubtedly challenging, the Government would like to thank all of the claimants for participating in order to finally resolve this matter and enable both parties to move forward. Lord Arbuthnot also raised the issue of remuneration of postmasters for their losses, and following that agreed settlement, the Post Office is continuing to directly address past events for affected postmasters. A scheme will be announced in the near future with the aim of addressing those historic shortfalls for postmasters, as I said, who are not part of that group litigation. I was also pleased to hear from the CEO of the new personalised support that postmasters are now receiving. This includes newly established area managers able to deliver support on the ground, an improved branch support centre to support teams throughout the UK, an overhaul of postmaster training, and above all, a further increase to postmaster remuneration. Now, Lord Arbuthnot also asked about the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters and its independence from the Post Office. And I think it's also fair to say that the Post Office has acknowledged criticisms from the litigation about its dealings with postmasters and is accelerating its programme of improving how it works with both postmasters and the NFSP. We in Government are also engaging with other stakeholders in the postmaster community, including the Communication Workers Union, to understand properly the views of postmasters. Going forward, government officials and ministers and officials in both UKGI and BEIS will hold the Post Office to account for these reforms, along with wider cultural and organisational changes, and will seek clear evidence that real positive change is taking place. Now, Lord Barclay asked about the actions of Fujitsu and the cases arriving from the litigation. And when handing down the... Sorry.
Grateful to the Noble Lord the Minister. Just before he leaves the subject of the accounts which are outstanding, could he confirm, yes or no, whether any director of the Post Office will be held to account for their actions?
I'll come on to that point shortly.
Thank you.
I was referring, I think, answering to Lord Barclay about questions on Fujitsu. When handing down the Horizon issues, the judgment raised concerns in relation to the evidence provided by Fujitsu employees, and those cases have been referred to the Director of Public Prosecutions. It is, of course, a matter for the DPP to consider what action, if any, he would like to take following that referral. Baroness Redfern asked about what kind of settlement and whether I referred to it being inadequate following Lord Duncan's comments. Now, we do recognise that it has been a difficult period for postmasters, to put it mildly, who have experienced the issues covered by this litigation. But mediation did take place between the parties in confidence, and whilst I can confirm the total amount of the settlement, which was 57.75 million, I'm sure the House can appreciate the legal sensitivities of the matter. Whilst the financial settlement is a major step towards resolving some of these grievances, there is more for the Post Office to do. The Post Office is committed to a major programme of work to overhaul its relationship with postmasters, which we are determined in Government to see delivered. My department, in addition to that, has taken steps to strengthen the mechanisms for doing so. This is included in expanding the BEIS Post Office policy team that works closely with UKGI in holding the Post Office to account at an official level. It also means strengthening the relationships and the responsibilities of the Post Office, BEIS and UKGI through a new framework document that formalises that relationship and the responsibilities of those parties involved, and I can announce that this will be published shortly. In addition, BEIS has established and chairs a quarterly working group between the NFSP and the Post Office. The working group is a forum for discussing Post Office and Postmaster relations and provides the opportunity of highlighting any concerns that postmasters may have. Government is also engaging with other stakeholders in the postmaster community, as I said earlier, including the Communication Workers Union, to understand the views of postmasters. Progress will also be monitored at the highest levels of the Post Office in quarterly ministerial meetings with the CEO, Nick Reid. I can also confirm to Baroness Burt that we, as I said, we are in the process of establishing the framework document to govern that relationship, and will be published soon. Let me now address her point about holding directors to...
Noble Lord Minister sits down. Clearly, he's not inclined to accept the need for an independent inquiry. Could he, however, accept that the independent non-executive director, who I think sits on the BEIS board, might have a particular role in ensuring that these promises are kept?
Indeed, I would be happy to accept that. Of course there should, but we believe that there should be additional accountability in place, which is why I outlined the further accountability mechanisms that we're putting in place. So it won't just be the director on the board, there will be a series of quarterly meetings between the CEO and ministers as well, to make sure that we put in place all the appropriate accountability required. Addressing the issue of directors responsible, we are pleased that the Post Office's Chairman and new CEO, as well as the previous CEO, have fully apologised for getting things wrong in the past. The appointment of the new CEO in September last year is an important step for the Post Office to improve how the organisation is run, along with its relationship with its postmasters. However, the Government does not propose taking any further action against current or former directors. Following the conclusion of the mediation, the Government's focus is now on ensuring that the Post Office lives up to its commitment and moves forward under the leadership of their new CEO. The judgment in this litigation have provided the independent view of the facts that both parties sought for many years, resulting in firm pledges from the Post Office to reform postmaster relations and to ensure the stability and sustainability of the network. My Lords, you can be sure that this Government will hold the Post Office to account in delivering reform and ensuring that those crucial changes have a tangible and positive impact on postmasters. We will make sure that those hard-working individuals are respected and valued for the fundamental role they play in upholding the Post Office network and with it delivering essential services to communities up and down the country. And finally, let me apologise. There are a number of points that were raised that I haven't had time to respond to in detail, but I will do so in writing.
Committee stands adjourned for 1 minute.
Just enough time.